Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today we are taking a look at a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that has definitely caught the eye of analysts because of its, well, explosive potential. We're talking about Reviva Pharmaceuticals. And the big question, the one everyone seems to be asking is Reviva Pharmaceuticals a good time to buy right now? Now, before we get into the weeds, we'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe, maybe give us a like, and then drop a comment on this video. Oh, and definitely let us know if there's another company you'd like us to look into next. Just put the name in the comments below.
That's right. And maybe before we dive in, let's just be super clear about what kind of company we're dealing with here in the analysis we've done. Reviva Pharmaceuticals is operating in that very high stakes world of clinical stage biopharma. And that context is absolutely crucial for anyone looking at the numbers. Their value right now, it's entirely speculative. It's all driven by the potential success of their main drug pipeline, not current revenue, not earnings. We are talking about the textbook definition of a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Okay, let's unpack that then. Because, yeah, if you're a traditional investor looking into the standard fundamentals, well, this summary is going to look frankly pretty disturbing. It's almost like a ghost in the machine, isn't it?
Yeah.
The usual metrics we rely on for financial health are just not really there.
Precisely. I mean, look at the trailing 12 months TTM. You'll find no publicly available revenue. Why? Because they don't have any approved products actually generating sales yet. They are, almost by definition at this stage, a cash-burning entity. Everything's focused purely on research and development, R&D. And you see that reflected clearly in their reported net loss, about $27.11 million for the TTM. That works out to a diluted EPS of negative $1.64. But, and this is important, that loss isn't necessarily bad management. It's just the incredibly high cost of running these advanced clinical trials.
Right, the cost of innovation, essentially. But the sources we looked at also highlighted something critical that was missing, which sounds like a huge red flag.
It is. It's absolutely the crucial caveat here because this is a pre-revenue company, right? It's heavily reliant on outside money, external capital. So things like free cash flow, non-existent NA. But maybe more worrying, the source material we had lacked detailed and critically up-to-date figures for cash on hand and debt levels. And that information basically dictates their survival, their runway. How long can they keep operating? This is why we absolutely have to stress this point. Anyone seriously looking at this company must bypass the usual third-party data aggregators. You need to go straight to the source. Go to the SEC EDGRR database. You need to pull up their latest Q3 2025 filings yourself, verify exactly how much cash they have left, what their current burn rate is. Without doing that homework, honestly, you're making a pure blind bet.
Okay, so the financials are, let's say, incomplete and demand serious homework. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because the market, or at least parts of it, seems willing to look past all those financial red flags. Why? Because of one thing, the potential payoff. The company's entire value proposition seems tied to a single high-potential drug candidate.
Absolutely. That's the whole story here. The core value, everything, it centers entirely on brilaroxazine. Its development code is RP5063. This drug is already in late-stage trials. And its target market, schizophrenia, other major neuropsychiatric disorders, I mean, this is an enormous market. We're talking billions, potentially many billions of dollars available for any treatment that's genuinely superior to what's out there now.
Yeah, this isn't some niche condition. This is aiming to disrupt a massive multi-billion-dollar market. So why do analysts think brilaroxazine is the one? What makes it different? The standard of care must be pretty entrenched.
Well, it really comes down to a significant unmet medical need. That's the phrase you hear a lot. See, many existing antipsychotics, yeah, they can be effective, but they often come with really debilitating side effects.
Right. Things like major weight gain, metabolic issues.
Exactly. Metabolic syndrome, motor side effects like tardive dyskinesia. These are serious problems for patients. The analysis suggests that brilaroxazine potentially offers a genuinely favorable safety and tolerability profile compared to these older drugs. That's the hope. Now, if those results hold up in the final phase 3 trials, well, this drug wouldn't just treat the condition, it could potentially become the preferred standard of care almost overnight. That would drastically improve things like patient compliance, quality of life.
And that superior safety profile, that's the key financial driver behind these huge potential valuations analysts are talking about, isn't it? Because if you really do have the best drug, especially regarding side effects, you could capture a massive chunk of that market.
Precisely. That's the logic. And importantly, to protect that potential future market share, they seem to have done their homework on the IP front. Brilaroxazine, and actually another key asset they have called RP1208, both apparently have composition of matter patents secured, and that's across all the major global markets, US, Europe, Japan, etc. That intellectual property protection is essential. It basically confirms that if they win the clinical race, if they get approval, they can commercialize it without an immediate threat from generic copies.
Okay, so when analysts talk about dramatic upside, we really are looking at that classic biotech binary outcome. It's all or nothing, completely dependent on the science working out.
It is completely binary. You've hit the nail on the head. If brilaroxazine succeeds, gets the nod from regulators like the FDA, and then launches successfully into the market, then you potentially see that dramatic upside. But if it fails in late-stage trials, or maybe the safety profile doesn't look quite as good in the larger studies,
And the whole thing collapses.
then the stock faces, potentially a near total collapse because there's no underlying revenue, no existing business to support the valuation. That is the fundamental risk bargain you absolutely have to accept if you're considering investing in a company like Reviva.
Okay, let's shift gears then and talk about how the market is currently viewing that bargain. Because the stock itself, wow, it's been on a truly frightening roller coaster. When you look at just the past year, the volatility is just extreme. The 52-week range goes from a low of $0.30 all the way up to $4.28. And right now, it's definitely depressed. It's down something like 68% over the past year.
Yeah, that 52-week range really tells the story, doesn't it? It perfectly encapsulates the cycle of speculation, hope, and then disappointment. Technically speaking, looking at the charts, we can see pretty strong support seems to have formed right near that absolute low, around 30 cents. Now, if it were to break below that level, sentiment could really, really crumble further. On the upside, resistance looks like it's currently sitting right near the 50-day simple moving average, which is around 0.43 cents. But the bigger picture, the broader trend, is undeniable. The 200-day SMA is way up there at 0.97 cents. That confirms this stock is in a sustained long-term downtrend right now.
And this is where I start getting genuinely confused. I'm looking at this long-term downtrend, the stock price bumping along near its absolute lows, and then I see the analyst consensus. Firms like Benchmark, Chardon Capital, Citigroup, these aren't small shops. They usually do serious homework. And they're putting out a consensus strong buy rating. How do we possibly reconcile that huge disconnect? A strong buy on something down 68% near its lows.
That is the absolute crux of the investment thesis here, isn't it? It's baffling on the surface. What it implies is that the conviction level among these institutional analysts is fundamentally different from the current retail market sentiment. These analysts, they're not really looking at the current stock chart, the technicals. They're looking almost purely through the lens of potential regulatory success down the road. They seem to have very high confidence in the underlying clinical data they've seen and the sheer size of the market opportunity if the drug works.
Okay, so they're betting on the science winning out over the current market mood. And when we talk about the potential upside that you're forecasting, it's not just a small bump, is it? What's the average price target looking like?
It's extraordinary, frankly. The average 12-month price target we're seeing projected is somewhere between $4.50 and $4.86.
450 to 486.
Yep. Now, compare that to where the stock is trading now, well under 50 cents. You are looking at an implied potential gain of over 800%. 800%. So the analysts are essentially making a very bold argument. They're saying the current low price is a profound mispricing by the market. They see it as an exceptional opportunity, but only if you accept that huge underlying clinical risk we keep talking about.
It's just fascinating, though, that retail investors don't seem to be sharing that same high conviction level right now. You mentioned the technicals. Things like momentum indicators are pretty neutral. The RSI is sitting around 52.26, sort of middle of the road. But the broader retail sentiment, if you look at something like the Fear and Greed Index, that's currently reflecting fear. It's at 39. That tells you there's some real skepticism, maybe even fear among individual traders about whether this drug will actually make it across the finish line.
It absolutely signals a divide, a big one. You've got the institutions, or at least these analysts, focusing on the long-term binary outcome, and they're bullish. Meanwhile, the broader market seems more focused on the recent downtrend, the scary chart, and maybe the constant threat of dilution, which actually brings us neatly to what's coming up next.
Right. So what does all this mean for the immediate future? What are the next big moves? The scheduled catalysts, I guess, that could potentially trigger some of that huge projected upside, or maybe trigger more fear.
Okay, yeah, there are a few specific events coming up that investors really need to have on their radar, probably within the next, say, 0 to 3 months. And remember, we're looking for updates on visibility and capital, not revenue figures. First up, they're scheduled to participate at the Roth Healthcare Opportunities Conference. That's on October 9th, 2025. This is typically where company leadership meets with institutional investors, gives updates on their strategy, maybe some hints on clinical timelines.
Okay, so potentially some news flow from that. And then the earnings release. I assume, like you said, it's less about the money made or lost and more about milestones achieved.
Exactly. The Q3 2025 earnings release is estimated to be around November 7th, 2025. Investors are absolutely not looking for revenue numbers here. Don't expect any. What they're looking for is updates on trial enrollment progress, any new data snippets from ongoing studies, confirmation of that cash runway we talked about, and maybe some clarification on the burn rate. Success for a company like this at this stage is measured purely in medical progress, not financial margin. We also have some institutional activity expected in December, things like major ETF rebalancing around December 6th, potentially, and then the big institutional 13F filing deadline around December 19th. These filings show who owns the stock, and changes here could influence ownership structure and maybe provide some liquidity.
Right. And speaking of liquidity and cash, they recently raised capital, didn't they? Which, while necessary to keep the lights on and the trials running, always carries that risk of dilution for existing shareholders. That must be weighing on the price, too.
That is one of the, perpetual risks you deal with in the biotech sector. It's almost unavoidable for companies without revenue. Back in September 2025, they announced the pricing of a $9 million public offering. Now, this involved issuing 27 million new shares, along with accompanying warrants. And while that infusion of capital is absolutely essential to fuel those expensive clinical programs and maybe diversify their institutional shareholder base, it inherently increases the total number of shares outstanding. That means it dilutes the ownership stake, the slice of the pie, for everyone who held shares before the offering. This constant need for capital funding, this dilution risk, is probably the biggest material risk factor outside of the actual clinical trial results failing.
Okay. And what about unscheduled stuff, the rumors, the speculative buzz that often sends these volatile stocks flying or crashing? What's the chatter about?
Yeah, the speculative side is always active with these names. The main chatter seems focused on the potential for strategic partnerships. Given the perceived high potential value of brilaroxazine, there's always the possibility of a licensing deal, maybe a co-development agreement with a larger pharmaceutical partner.
Ah, that would be big news.
Huge. It would validate the drug in the eyes of many, and importantly, bring in potentially non-dilutive capital, cash, without issuing more shares. Beyond that, people are always watching for maybe accelerated readouts or positive updates from the ongoing trials, or even, given their pipeline focus is CNS central nervous system R&D and they have that patent portfolio, there's always background M&A interest chatter. Could someone just buy them outright? It's possible, though highly speculative. Updates on orphan drug designation could also be a factor.
Okay, lots of potential catalysts, scheduled and unscheduled. But we have to wrap this up by hitting the risk profile one last time, because that 800% potential upside is incredibly seductive, but the downside, as you said, could be catastrophic.
Correct.
So who's this investment really suitable for?
Look, this investment is strictly, and I mean strictly, suitable only for investors who are extremely risk tolerant. You have to be fully prepared for the possibility of losing your entire investment, a total loss of principal. The risks here are just intensely elevated. Let's recap them clearly. First, and most importantly, clinical risk. All the value rests on the success of those trials. Failure means, well, devastation for the stock price. It's almost binary. Second, the funding risk. As we just discussed, their ongoing reliance on the capital markets means dilution is a constant material threat that will likely continue to pressure the share price. And finally, there's regulatory risk. Even if the trials are successful, the FDA or other global regulators could delay approval, they could ask for more data, more studies, or in the worst case, outright reject the application.
Okay, so pulling everything together from the sources we reviewed, how would you synthesize the overall investment thesis for Reviva Pharmaceuticals right now?
I think the most accurate description is a speculative buy. Yes, it has that high, strong buy rating from analysts, but you have to understand why. That rating is driven entirely by the very high conviction those specific analysts have in the potential of brilaroxazine to treat this huge, underserved market, particularly with a better safety profile. It really is a classic binary investment. Think of it like buying a lottery ticket, albeit one based on complex science. You're buying it for the potential for truly transformative gains if the drug succeeds. but you absolutely must be prepared for that investment to go effectively to zero if it fails.
Understood. Binary outcome. High risk, high potential reward. And before anyone listening even thinks about making a move based on that incredible potential upside, what is the single most crucial piece of due diligence they absolutely must do?
You must, and I cannot stress this enough, review the company's most recent 10K and 10Q filings yourself. These are the comprehensive annual and quarterly reports. Get them directly from the SEC EDGR database online. It's free. You need the absolute most current financial figures, the latest clinical updates straight from the company, and a full, unfiltered understanding of all the risk factors they disclose before you even consider investing a single dollar. Please, do not rely solely on analyst price targets or the excitement about potential upside. Do your own homework on the official filings.
That is absolutely essential advice. Okay, so let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. Given that these respected analyst firms are implying an 800% rise, suggesting immense confidence in the drug's potential, yet the stock itself is trading near its 52-week low, stuck in a sharp long-term downtrend, and retail sentiment is fearful. What does that fundamental contradiction tell you? Is this incredibly low price the massive opportunity the analysts see? Or is the market, perhaps more wisely, already pricing in a much greater chance of clinical failure than those analysts are admitting? What really stands out to you?